I'd like to welcome you all. This is a different type of lecture than I would normally do. It's all about understanding our career changes or career choices based upon our life energy. Now, I'm offering this for a simple reason. I have found a lot of people who, once they understand that they might have been conditioned and trained and educated to take on a career that they really didn't feel comfortable with, even if they succeeded at it. And therefore, how do they make a change? How do you get from where you're at to someplace else without going through enormous crisis and tearing your life apart or causing unnecessary conflict? And when you have families involved with children and spouses, having them feel that somehow you've just lost it. You know, you're off on some strange and bizarre discovery. So what I've done is I've listed all the different primary professions. Now, of course, there are going to be some that I will have missed, but I went through all the different educational catalogs and all the different computer systems and on the internet to get all the different career choices, keeping in mind that there are going to be those I don't have, in which case you can offer them up and I'll be happy to tell you what I feel. And these are intuitive and these are calculated assumptions you'd best fit into. But I want to state from the beginning that people are highly adaptive, and especially the dynamics. Dynamics could fit, like a dynamic supportive could fit in many different professions. It doesn't mean that they would like it, but it also means they could stay in there for a long period of time. And we learn to like things. We learn to say, oh, it's okay. But if you could start all over again with your life, I mean, start from scratch and say, all right, on a scale of 1 to 100, where are you in the joy of your life concerning your career? Most people wouldn't be high up in that. They have learned to tolerate. And tolerance is not the same as a heartfelt acceptance. Because when you find someone that really loves their work, they're honoring their life through their work, then you begin to appreciate what it means to have the right career. After all, 1/4 of our entire life is spent working in our career or more, so why not do it right? And don't assume for a second you can't start over. You can start over. And I'm going to show you step by step how to begin all over again. Though in different life energies, those choices are based upon how much flexibility a life energy has or normally would show. Some can make a real quick choice. Boom, they're out of one career and they're into another, and they don't look back. Others will spend 4 or 5 years posturing, should I, shouldn't I? Well, maybe I, and I'm not sure. They're always hesitating. We'll try to get you through that abyss also. If you have questions, I'd like for you to hold your questions until a time in the discussion when I'll ask you to stand and speak very loudly, because I only have one mic here, and I'm going to have to either repeat what you say so that those people who are not here tonight but watching it from their home can also appreciate your question. Now, I'm sure many of you have ideas about who you are. Before we started, just for the audience's sake, I went around the room and I asked everyone what their career was. And most of the careers were either in the area of creative assertives, lots of artists, adaptive assertives, which are people in specialty fields where it takes a great deal of attention, focus, detail, discipline, and generally their career stays in one area, like a supervisor or a computer person or an accountant. It doesn't take charisma to do the job, but it does take a great deal of insight and scholarship. And these people tend to be bookworms. They read more than the rest of us. They can spend a lot more time on a project without being bored by that project. In fact, every day they get up, they love the challenge. So the more problems you have, the more adrenaline they get pushed. And part of the whole idea of their life is knowing that they can solve problems. They love to solve problems. That's where they get a lot of their joy from. Where others, they don't want problems. You give them a problem and they don't know how to handle it. They start talking, they get on the phone with someone at home. Oh, I had this problem today. And it would just, got me all upset. I couldn't handle it. And, I got sweaty and I got a headache. Where an adaptive assertive will talk about how they solved the problem. And it was an interesting challenge and what they learned. And so, same problem, each person handles it differently. But last night when I did a lecture on life energies last night at the Learning Alliance. And I've done, last weekend I did 4 lectures last Saturday, and I've done about 8 lectures in the last week and a half. I also, for the last 5 years, have asked everyone at all my lectures to just mention the same thing. What do you do? I have never had dynamic aggressives at any of my lectures. They don't show up. And that tells us something. It also better explains and shows you rather graphically the whole idea of how legitimate the life energies is, because if it is legitimate in defining that people who are in a dominant position do not like to make themselves feel as if they don't know something and would have to share information as if they were equal to you, then it humbles them. So you won't see them at some place like this, because they don't want you to feel that being a CEO, they have to learn anything more. After all, if they're making $1 million or $10 million or $100 million a year, some are making, why do they need anything more? They don't need these workshops. They're having power breakfast, power lunch. And by the way, dynamic aggressives make the world run, but not because they're brilliant and not because they have knowledge that you and I don't have. All they have is a capacity to galvanize all the other energies in one direction, but they're virtually helpless. They could do nothing on their own. I have never met a dynamic aggressive who has any concept of details or patience or scholarship. And I'll even show you how accurate that is. 20 years ago, there was a survey of how many of the leading CEOs were college graduates. It was under 10%. Now, how many times have you heard that the only way you can get ahead is to have an education? Well, how do they explain that anomaly? They have no education, and yet they're the ones more than any other group that do get ahead. But they take everyone else with them, up or down. And the adaptive aggressives are the ones who are right behind them. Now, on the upside, adaptive aggressives are essential. In fact, it is the adaptive aggressive that allows the dynamic aggressive to succeed. They form their inner circle. And the first thing a dynamic aggressive does is they will get people who are facilitators, who can get things done without being concerned if people like them in the process. If an adaptive aggressive, I should say, knows that they are an essential part of a dynamic aggressive's support team, then they don't care who they abuse or insult. Or they are the kind of people who say, I want it now, I want it an hour from now. If you can't get it, you're gone. Other people would feel very uncomfortable dealing with people in any kind of lack of sensitivity. Adaptive aggressives have no problems being insensitive. On the downside, they will do that. On the upside, they're more tactful. Same capacity, more tactful. And if they're not associated with a dynamic aggressive, they'll be very charming. And you'd never know that they had this other side to them, this side that can be extremely insensitive. So you have very few adaptive aggressives here, in part because they lack patience on the downside. They want instant gratification. They're not into scholarship. They generally are not well educated. About the best you can expect is a BA, and that is a traumatic experience for them, especially at test time. They'll do anything to cheat. They're the ones you hear about bribing, to get the exams. They're very good. They'll negotiate a good deal. Yeah. But they are essential within a society. And yet the two groups that could make a difference here are not here. Now, if I were wrong and there were no such thing as life energies, then why wouldn't we have as many CEOs? They could benefit from this information. And by the way, if I was talking about nutrition, if I was talking about alternative cancer therapies, if I talked about a cure for arthritis and heart disease and Alzheimer's, things that they or their family members suffer from, they still would not be here. They won't be at Jones Beach this summer, right? They won't be where common people are. They can't identify with average people. You're a model, right? A modeling agency owner would not be here. Again, it goes against the image that they've tried to maintain. If I've got all this, I'm not going to show people I'm vulnerable by what I don't know, so I'm always going to put on that facade. But they're also very good at picking people's brains in a superficial way to know just enough to make superficial decisions. I just wanted to point that out. I want you to think about that anytime you go to a meeting and see how many dynamics you have, unless it's a meeting of dynamics, like the Young Presidents Club or something like that. And unless it's a particular organization where they've specifically been invited. And the most of any group that I almost always have are creative assertives because they tend to be the most vulnerable. And next would be the adaptive assertives because they're willing to learn and they're not afraid to acknowledge what they don't know, and they don't really attach a lot of ego to what they know. They just know it, they share it, because they're not always rewarded for what they do. They're kind of the quiet people in the background that create the miracle drugs and the scientists and the computer experts. And some dynamic assertives because they're also interested in change and growth, but not a whole lot because they just represent a very tiny percentage. They're the smallest of all the groups is the dynamic assertive. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the different careers. And after I go through the careers and I explain which career I feel, and again, this is only my input, I feel aligns it with what a life energy can do. You have to consider that if you've been trained to be a lawyer, but you really are a creative supportive, a dynamic supportive, and you should be a healer. You're charismatic, you can motivate people, but you've been motivating them in a courtroom or in a corporate suite instead of one-on-one. And I see a lot of adaptive aggressives trying to be dynamic and failing and extremely upset by it. And I see a lot of dynamic supportives, coaches, teachers, healers, who end up living like they're adaptive aggressives. They end up in marketing and sales. Now, they can do it. Anybody who's charismatic can sell you something. And if they've been conditioned to be a salesperson, they'll be extremely good at it. But there won't be fulfillment. And as a group, the largest single number of people I find in addictions and going into recovery movements are dynamic supportives who have lived like adaptive aggressives. They've been motivating people, but for the wrong reasons, and they haven't had the inner feeling of fulfillment and completeness. But how do you tell someone that? How do you explain to someone that you just don't feel good? You have it all. You have a family, you have children, you have success, you're making good money, and with all that, you feel empty inside. They look at you like, what are you, crazy? What right do you have to feel bad? You have everything. Everybody loves you, you're charming, you're very charismatic, and you're doing well. And they say, I know, but I just don't feel like I belong here. I don't know where I belong. Well, at a certain point, out of frustration, many of them are going to start taking something to take the pain away. And the pain frequently is taken away by alcohol or drugs or some addictive behavior. Now, that's a choice. And that choice can get out of control when they keep relying upon it, because it might be the only place where they don't feel that inner loneliness and that inner pain. And then they start to rely upon always wanting that, and then they go over the line, and then now they have a physical addiction. But that physical addiction originally was not because of a physical or biochemical reaction, it was because of an improper series of choices, because they weren't aligning themselves with the right energy. And I know because now that I'm helping people work with their life energy, I'm getting more positive results of keeping people out of addictions, healthy lifestyles, making constructive choices. And it's very hard to motivate a dynamic supportive to begin with. They are very, very difficult because they're charismatic and everything comes so easy. Communicating comes easy, surviving comes easy. They seem to do effortlessly what a lot of other people do with difficulty. They can express themselves. They're great conversationalists. But they do more talking than they do living. In other words, most of what they do is in their conversation, not in actualizing. So they're always procrastinating. So getting them to stop procrastinating and start doing something, they're thinking, well, all right, I'll exercise. So they might exercise once, and they stop exercising. Or they'll start to eat well, but only when you're there will they eat well. When you're not there, when you're preparing it for them, they'll eat it. When you're not preparing for them, they won't eat it. When you take them out for a bike ride, they'll go bike riding. When not, they can just sit around and watch television all day or sit around BS all day. They're happy. And partly that's because when you're not being who you really are, you don't feel commitment towards anything. How can you commit yourself to discipline and honoring the real self when you don't even know what the real self is? And so it's better to escape into the addictive behavior. Get them into the right energy, no more need for addictive behavior, break the physical addictions, and then it's easy for them to let go of the psychological addictions. Get them actualizing. The key is actualize. And then now they start to see what they should be doing. And when they make a career change, it's generally into the healing profession. So let's go through some of the careers. And after I go through the careers, then I'll open it up for questions, because I'm sure you all have questions about your own life and what you might be doing. Like some of you who are unemployed. You know, why are you unemployed? Is it because you can't find a job, or the jobs that you have looked at you don't feel would meet your real needs? And by the way, for the first time, millions of Americans are actually asking themselves, do I really need a job, a career, or do I need work that will honor who I am? I'm not any longer willing to work just to make a living and provide a standard of existence. I want something that's me. In the past, men would never do that. I mean, any of you grow up in a small town? No? Do you know in a small town there's a work ethic that whatever you do after high school or college, that's what you do the rest of your life? Trying to explain to people that that's not what you should be doing, they don't hear what you're saying. They cannot fathom that you'd give up a job. Because it's all security. And that's true of adaptive supportives. Adaptive supportives have the most difficult time of anyone in changing, because to them security is everything, and all they need is security. I mean, my God, if you gave adaptive supportive security, I don't care who's running the world and how it's being run, no one's going to do anything about it. Not the adaptive supportives, because they don't engage in the day-to-day challenges and policy-making, opinion leading of the world. They just do their work. Give you a little story as I get into this. Do you remember when Detroit was going through all of its close downs about 10 years ago? Massive unemployment in Dearborn and Flint, some of those small cities, where a high percentage of the people working within the mills were being let go. So I went up there. I was invited to come to Detroit and to lecture and to help out. And I met with a group of homeowners who were all unemployed. And first thing I noticed, they were all out of shape. I mean, massive out of shape. They had internalized their angst and pain. They'd sit in front of a television all day long watching Oprah and these other shows. By the way, it's only because we have so many adaptive supportives who are in pain and whose lives have been messed with by dynamic aggressives and adaptive aggressives that we end up having those shows be popular. If we were healthy as a nation, nobody would be watching Oprah or these other shows. There'd be no need to. She's the safety valve for people to go on and vent, and so you can say, well, gee, as bad as my life is, not as bad as people I saw on Oprah. Same with the soap opera. People want to see the intrigue, the adultery, the deceit in a soap opera. They want to vicariously and safely watch other people going through the lowest common denominators in human behavior. Because when they look at their own life never looks that bad. You never see them saying, let's watch a healthy soap opera where no one cheats, no one lies, no one steals, no one has sex outside of their marriage. No one would watch it. You go up there. In fact, recently there was a story about good news has become bad news for people giving good news. Nobody wants good news. Magazines, television shows, radio shows offering good news have got terrible ratings. Many of them have gone out of business. So anyhow, what I did was I sit down with these people and I said, well, how long did you know that it was going to close? And they said, oh, we've known for a long time the plant was going to close. I said, did you do anything about going back to school, getting through your union programs to re-skill yourself in trades and crafts? No. Well, what'd you do? Well, we just figured maybe it wouldn't be that long, or maybe they wouldn't do it. I said, but it was inevitable. I mean, they let you know that this was coming down. Or if you read any of the papers, you would have seen that they were going to downsize radically. They saw it, they knew it, and they avoided it. Now they were living in misery and miserable within the family, everything negative, palpably negative. So I got them into doing some things for themselves, baking their own bread, going to the market, buying fruits at the farmer's market, washing them, cutting them, putting a thread through them and drying them up in the attic so they could have dried fruits for like 4 cents a pound for apples and apricots and peaches and nectarines and pears, getting local farmers in the country to grow food for them, getting them into doing brown bag programs for others in the neighborhood, anything to get them self-sufficient, bring in some income to show that they don't have to have a life that stops because their work stopped. And it's only when they had nothing else left, when they were losing their home, going to live in their car, then they would pack the whole family up and head down towards Florida or Texas, the Sun Belt area. Figuring if they were going to be unemployed, might as well be unemployed where it's warmer rather than where it's not. But still, they got down there and they didn't re-educate themselves. They didn't go back to school. They just looked for whatever work they could. Needless to say, the work they were getting was not $30 an hour work or $40 an hour work when you add in all the bonuses and the other factors, health insurance. They'd work for $5 an hour. And needless to say, that caused a lot of internal anger, and then they became very abusive to themselves and their family. Lots of abuse and sickness. And that's where we got a lot of obesity, a lot of overweight. You rarely find adaptive aggressives overweight. They're too self-conscious about their image and style. But you do find an awful lot of adaptive supportives who are overweight. As a group, they're the largest group who's overweight and who has high blood pressure, diabetes, arthritis, and cancer. Now, you won't be able to see these, but I'll review them for you here. I'm going to go through some that have been made up, and then questions, we'll get to them, and I'll tell you how to make these changes. And I'll start with the adaptive supportives. Basic skills, they're extremely adept at that. So if you're a carpenter, you could be a plumber. A plumber, you could be an electrician. They love to work with their hands. And they love the things that they have to focus attention on, because virtually everything that the adaptive supportive does creates focus, but to the exclusion of everything else. Everything else is kind of set aside, and it's a point of focus. Construction work, dental hygienists, plumbers, travel agents, housekeepers, bank tellers, doormen, paralegals. These are people who are in the adaptive supportive, some of them. I'll go through some of the others also. Adaptive assertives, technical consultants, school headmasters, mistresses, building property managers, financial planners, statisticians, lab technicians, astronauts, pilots, scientists, people who need a career where there's always a challenge, but the challenge is a specific challenge. One project, one set of challenges to which they will be addressing themselves over many years. They're not good when you give them 100 challenges in 100 different areas. Dynamic aggressives are good at that, not adaptive assertives. That's why they can go into work each day in the same place forever. They'll work 30 years in one plant, but they'll make sure that everything in that plant they know how to do. They can do anything, fix anything. But don't look for them to do something other than that, because then it gets overwhelming for them. The creative assertives, designers, architects, photographers, even magicians, all the different arts and crafts, including writing, dancing, acting. This is all under creative assertives. We have adaptive aggressives. Adaptive aggressives would be a detective, but not a police officer, because a detective's work requires a different type of mindset than just a police officer. And how you deal with people is different. An art dealer, a telemarketer, a job recruiter, a news anchor person on television, models, consultants, marketing and sales. In fact, marketing and sales probably represents 80% of what adaptive aggressives do best. But adaptive aggressives also do one other thing better than anyone else: finance. They're very good at handling multiple problems simultaneously, figuring out the system and make it work, and then motivating people to buy into that system. That's why on Wall Street you got about 75,000 people. The vast majority of those are adaptive aggressives. They're the people, have you ever had the phone call that they've got a new stock that they want to offer you? You get any of those calls? I get them all the time. I don't know where they get the number. But these are the people who get very rich. In fact, of all the baby boomers, only the adaptive aggressives and the dynamic aggressives have gotten real wealthy. There are about 68 million baby boomers. The baby boomers, only those two groups that represent about, I would say somewhere in the neighborhood of about 8% of all people. Now, then I go back and I look at statistics. That means that approximately 14 million people have gotten very wealthy. And you start looking at how many people make the money. And they make money from money. And they can motivate you. They can sell you stuff. And they're willing to take more risks. On Wall Street, people have to have more education of what they're doing and take more risks versus a clothing salesperson. At the cutting edge, they live in a high-stress environment. Adaptive aggressives feel best when the pace is fast and relentless. Now, on the one hand, they'll complain about how much stress they're under, and on the other hand, they feed off that stress. They wake right up the next day and they have all this energy. They're one of the few energies that can stay up all night playing and be right up the next morning, and be at work at 9 o'clock after staying out till 5. Other energies, it would wipe them out. They couldn't do it. Even creative assertives couldn't do it. In fact, they're the only energy that can do that. And I've seen, who do you think, for instance, in the 1970s, in the sexual revolution, in the gay community and the heterosexual community, it was the adaptive aggressives that were out there having all the sex and partying. That's who it was out there. They're style conscious, they're excited by life, they get bored easily, they want to be in a career or in some place where there's a lot of action, a lot of stuff happening. So you put them in a normal type of office situation, they get bored, unless they're the office manager. And then they don't mind it because they control all the politics within an office. So what you have to understand, if you are an adaptive aggressive, the best job for you is one where there's a lot of stress, but it's stress that you can handle. And where, even with all that stress, you don't become burnout in the process. It's like an enzyme that can act in a lot of different biochemical processes but not get used up itself. They just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. When I was interviewing people who had chronic fatigue syndrome, by the way, a lot of them have chronic fatigue syndrome, they pushed themselves because they weren't willing to have normal hours, and you don't see them generally hanging out at night and relaxing. They're always wanting to do something. They always want to be someplace. And interesting, they always know where everything is at. That's kind of interesting that none of the rest of us ever know where it's at. They'll find the club, the dance, the movie. They'll find stuff that no one ever goes to, and they'll always be at these places. And the rest of the things, that was so neat. How come I didn't know that that was going on? How come you're always at these places? They're the ones that will go in the morning and be just beaming, and they had a lot of fun, and everyone else kind of listens to them talk about all the things they did. They're always going someplace else. Now that's another thing. Listen carefully. Adaptive aggressives never feel that where they're at is where they're going to be. They use every place they're at as the next step. Now with that in mind, adaptive aggressives shouldn't be in careers that require long-term commitment. They can't give it. And if they do, then they start feeling the kind of distress that makes them unhappy, because stress is normal for them, but distress is not. So let's say that they're desperate and they feel that there's an advantage in taking a particular job. So they take the job. But the job requires a 2-year commitment. They could do the job, but they don't like the idea of being anywhere for 2 years, because they just think they're going to be someplace else that's going to be a lot more interesting. So they tend to hop around. So if you accept that you're going to be hopping around, then just plan on being in jobs you can jump from job to job to job. When you get bored with it, you go to another job. By the way, as a group, you find more adaptive aggressives in temping jobs, temping at different agencies around. You find a lot of adaptive aggressives, especially down on Wall Street, or places where they're in the heart of the action even though they're not a part of it. And they're not owning it. They generally will never own their business. I do not suggest adaptive aggressives ever get into your own business. That, to me, would be a kiss of death. Because to get into your own business, you've got to handle things that you're not going to have the patience for. First, when problems occur, you're not going to feel comfortable dealing with them. They're not into the kind of technical detail that an adaptive assertive needs. They can be highly predatory and jealous, protecting their turf. And they generally don't care what other people think about them. They're going to go right through life making things happen for them and for whoever they work with. But that's not what kind of attitude you have to own a business. You have to be very humble with people that are not nice at all. You have to be kind to people who can be very rude and vulgar. They would not do well in the restaurant business and office services. But and the ones that I know who have tried their own businesses have almost always failed. And then they always find someone else to blame for why they failed. You always know an adaptive aggressive. They're always a person that's got one foot firmly planted where they're at and seeking another position somewhere else. So they can't commit to anything indefinitely. It's always kind of a tentative commitment. Well, how many people want people to work for them where there's a tentative commitment? Yet I've learned this. So now if I need work done that I know only an adaptive aggressive can do, then I build a project that only an adaptive aggressive could do. For example, I'm going to take some of these and put them into some catalogs around the United States. It's a perfect job for an adaptive aggressive. They're smart, they're knowledgeable, they'll know the market, they'll know how to reach the people. They'll figure out how to sell this because they love to work on commissions because they don't want to be trapped by a salary. They want to know they can make as much as they can make. And by the way, they generally make a lot of money. They don't always save it. They spend it as quickly as they make it frequently, and they'll spend it on things that are not wise investments. They do a lot of things that, in retrospect, they should have saved the money. But adaptive assertive will save money. Oh my God, they'll have the first dollar they ever made. I mean, you go into their house, they've got a couch that's 30 years old, but it's not broken. I mean, and it's not even worn, because when they sit down by putting their hands down first and then lowering themselves on the couch. And if they've got china, you know, the china is eaten and then it's immediately washed. You never see dishes in the sink of an adaptive assertive. And if they've got a refrigerator, it's cleaned, and they actually are the only energy that knows how, as well as to remember, to clean the drip pan underneath the condenser. If you looked under your refrigerator, first thing you're going to say if you're adaptive aggressive, there's a drip pan under there. What's under there? There's something growing. It's a blob. I ain't going underneath there. Buy another refrigerator. I'm out of here. I want a new apartment. I need a cook. I got too many things. Cook for me and clean up after me, and I don't want to see it, right? That's an adaptive aggressive. Adaptive assertive says, what do you mean, clean up? I'll clean up. And so they put the apron on. And the men clean up right beside the women. They share responsibilities completely. And if you go into the bedrooms, they generally, after a certain amount of years, sleep separately. And their closets have all clothes by colored design and almost all gray or blue, dark blue, and kind of muted, but all clean. Upstairs in their attic, you'll always know you're in the home of an adaptive assertive, because in the middle of the summer, where your house is absolutely an oven and you've got 2 air conditionings on, they'll have no air conditioning, they'll have an exhaust fan, and the whole house is cool. In their attic is where they put their exhaust fan, and their attic has all the clothes they've worn since they were 11 years old in bags with mothballs. And they'll have every copy of National Geographic and by number. And they'll have 7,000 books up there, and they will have read them. And then you ask them, what are you doing with these things? And they're saving them. At their desk, go to adaptive aggressive desk. The adaptive aggressive desk is utter chaos. They love to make it look like they're doing a lot of work, but they're not. They're going to get back to it. They love to procrastinate. When are you going to do this? Soon. I've got to. It's driving me crazy. A year from now. I'm going to do it within the millennia. Well, that's 100 years from now. I'm going to do it, though, before then. Piles of stuff. But they manage, though it takes a lot of time and effort, to find what they had messed up. Adaptive assertive, nothing's on the desk. They have a pad that doesn't have any marks on it, like no one's ever used it, but it's been there for 23 years. But not even one ink spot's on that mat. And the desk doesn't have any banging, you know, where you pull up a chair, that adaptive aggressive, pull it up, break it, and scuff it. They're not into maintenance. Things just don't get maintained. Carpets, like, don't get vacuumed. Doesn't look dirty, does it? Yeah, it wasn't clean till your mother was here last. Well, that's what mothers are for when you move out of the house. They come and they clean. It's like all my Jewish male friends who are lawyers, I have several, it's like they put their mothers in the closet. So when they leave, the mother magically comes out and says, oh, I have the joy of cleaning my son's house and doing his underwear. They don't do any of this stuff. Don't do it. Whereas if you go into an adaptive assertive home, first off, they've not only done the underwear, but they've actually closed the box of detergents. There's nothing open, right? Where everybody else, you don't know, it's empty. Damn thing's empty. They have 16 other boxes backed up, and their underwear is folded. You know how you folded and stacked in the drawers. T-shirts, underwear, and nothing ever seems to go bad. Everybody else, they've got, you know, it looks faded or something. Theirs just never like that, and when it does, they finally give it away to some charity. You go into their garage, go into an adaptive aggressive garage, nothing's in place, nothing works. It's there until someone takes it away. Adaptive assertive, you could eat off the floor. The Rambler that's in there, they'll still have Ramblers, 30 years later, works perfect. Their basement, no leakage, a cooler with every form of frozen food for the next 200 years in case there's a bomb someplace in the Middle East. They'll be able to go downstairs and eat without. And their insurance policies, the adaptive aggressive is going to get around to getting a checkup, but hasn't. Wants to have insurance, but it's not really a priority because can I really get sick? I don't think so. I'm not big and fat like everyone else. And so they put off things like getting health done. Adaptive assertives have 14 insurance policies and annuities all paid up. So if anything happens, the next 300 years they're taken care of. Adaptive aggressives, vacation time, St. Moritz, Morocco, ballooning over the Alps, scuba diving in Ecuador. But they'll do these things that no one else does, and they'll know groups like the Explorers Club, and you think, what Explorers Club? You went up and photographed polar bears? Yeah, we were hovering over them, you know, in a balloon, and we photographed them. We went looking for timber wolves and photographed them, and you think, what a neat thing to do. How did you know to do all this? Oh, you know, and they're all connected somehow. They all do this stuff. Adaptive supportives, what'd you do on your vacation? I went hunting. You did? What'd you hunt? Squirrels? Did you eat them? Nah, some of them, kind of bitter. Did you cook them before you ate them? Did you do a sushi squirrel? You never know with adaptive supportives. They're the ones out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's a whole family of adaptive supporters on the downside. Adaptive assertives, where'd you go on your vacation? To my in-laws and fix their screen doors. And they would have. And that's the only thing in their in-laws' house now that works, is their screen doors. Each one of them has a different way of living. Therefore, think about the career that would allow you to do those things and have stability. The adaptive assertive needs to be in stable jobs. That's why they become government scientists. That's why they get into government agencies. They know that they're not going to have to hassle with the politics of an environment. They can stay there forever and do their work. And they're generally the ones who will be more conscientious in the work that they do. Whereas adaptive aggressives are not going to be working in government agencies unless it's the top level and something really exciting. A perfect example of a perfect adaptive aggressive doing their work is Oliver North. Right? He did 100 different things all at once, very complicated and convoluted processes with national security, and was a part of that whole Iran-Contra business and a lot of other things. But he did it, and I mean he did it, not Poindexter and not some of the other supervisors. They put it all on him. They can juggle 100 balls at once. Now, it's not that they did it that was right or wrong. You make your own judgment on that. But that is an example. Every dynamic aggressive always gets adaptive aggressives around him. Nixon had Haldeman, Ehrlichman, John Dean, Mitchell, people who were willing to do the bidding of the dynamic aggressive and know that they were protected. And indeed, they stayed loyal until they were cast off. Even Haldeman stayed loyal even after that. And I'll tell you another perfect example of an adaptive aggressive who wouldn't who was capable of doing all the work, and then out of his own obstreperous nature refused to cooperate, was Gordon Liddy. All right? Look at all that he did. He was a lawyer, he was district attorney, he was in the agencies, and now he's got a very popular radio show. How you figure? Because adaptive aggressives are charming. They're not charismatic, they're charming. Therefore, they should be in a job, a career, where charm is an essential part of it. Charm allows people to trust you. Without charm, you're not going to trust someone. Charm allows people to be motivated. Now, you got to work harder if you just have charm and not charisma. Charisma, anything you do, people are just going to be enthralled by it. They're going to want to know what's it about? How can I get involved? That's why most of your evangelists and televangelists are dynamics, whereas your marketing people are adaptives. So if you wanted to use your skills in healing, the first thing you got to do if you want to be a healer is you have to have charisma. Without charisma, you're not going to get a patient coming back. And you know how I realized this? I was helping a person who wanted to be a healer, a very nice, sweet person. And this person went to school and got degrees and graduate degrees and came to me, and I helped this person. And I must have given this person 1,000 people. And none of them ever come back. Only a couple would come back. And I couldn't figure it out. So I sat in on some of the sessions a couple years ago, and I'd just sit quietly in the back of her room and I listened. And it was good information. It was not that she was not caring, she was. And she knew what she was talking about, she did. Very conscientious. But I would watch the face. I'd sit over here and watch the face of the patient, and I could see at a certain point the eyes kind of looking out here, and you know, kind of that stare that people get when they're no longer connected to what you're saying or to you. And I'd notice that, and one after another after another. Now this is before my life energy philosophy came to me, and I couldn't figure it out. Now it's so clear. She was a adaptive, assertive, trying to do the work of a dynamic supportive. She was on her upside and good, but she took that ability to understand and get master's degree in technical sciences, and she didn't have the charisma. And it's charisma that keeps people focused on you. Now then I got someone, just to see if this would work, I got someone who was far less capable, didn't even have the degrees this person had, but was very charismatic. My God, everybody loved this person. And they weren't good. But people got better because they loved coming to this person. That was the phenomenon. This other person had all the knowledge, skills, and talent, and really good information. People stopped coming. They come once, wouldn't come again. And she was so frustrated, and I felt so sorry for her, because she's such a nice person. This other guy wasn't a bad person. He didn't care as much as the other one did, and he certainly didn't know anything. I know he knew nothing. All right? I knew what he knew. But he would sit there and talk with people and motivate them and get them to start eating right. By God, they come back next week and say, look what I've done. I changed my diet, I started exercising, and that's how he worked. And I realize now it was because he was a dynamic, and dynamic supportives are the ones that can motivate you because you like being in their presence. You like just being there. When you like being around someone, it becomes almost secondary what you're going to get from being around them. It's just the presence. It's like in a relationship. If any of you are in a relationship with a dynamic, supportive, assertive, or aggressive on the upside, you just love being around the people because they're where everything's happening. They can talk, you love to hear them, even if you don't understand what they're saying. And it's just fun. And that's something we don't appreciate. If you need to be around, if you're adaptive aggressive, you need to be around dynamic aggressives. So seek out a situation where you can partner. Seek out someone who needs you for your charm, your motivation, your determination, your sense of focus, but at the same time, your freedom, that when you've achieved your goals, you let them know it's a stepping stone and you're going on to the next step. This way you don't feel trapped in, because the one thing that adaptive aggressives feel is trapped. When you feel trapped, you're not going to be good at what you do. You're going to be angry half the time. And that manifests, by the way, in women, more adaptive aggressives, now I'm doing it by diseases, I find more adaptive aggressive women who have urinary tract infections, cystitis, and candida than any other complaints, because they internalize a lot of their frustration of not having a life, so they focus on their disease, which is not deadly, but it's limiting. Now they don't have to look at what they haven't done because they've got this illness. And in our society, we don't cause people to be uncomfortable if they have an illness. So every day they can go and say, oh, I still got it, still got it. And with men the same way. They'll have these little constant aches and pains. Now, dynamic supportives, midwives, personal trainers, aerobics instructors, animal trainers, speech therapists, nutritionists, physicians, marriage counselors, motivational speakers, consultants. All of those require charisma. All of them require you to trust the person. Now let's say that you were a teacher and you were unhappy in a fixed setting. By the way, dynamic supportives work best in a controlled environment because the environment forces them to maintain certain disciplines and standards. When they're on their own, they can be unemployed for a year or more. They don't have that urge, that urgency to go out there and do anything. They can just hang out for the rest of their life. They can. And that's what's so frustrating trying to help a dynamic supportive who's not in a career right now, because nothing seems to fit or nothing seems to be right, and they don't really care. You care more about them than they care about them getting work. They are responsible, but they figure everything comes kind of easy to them, so in time they'll get their work. But you get them into a setting where they can be focused, they will. But dynamic supportives always do less for themselves in their health than they do for other people. They rarely pay attention to their own real essential needs. As a result, I see a lot of illness, the serious illnesses, cancer, heart disease, and dynamic supportives. And they're the kind of people that will smoke, but encourage other people not to smoke. And then when they get lung cancer, say that it had nothing to do with their smoking. They're very capable of making themselves believe when they're in denial. They can deny anything and people tend to believe them. So it works against them, that charisma, because they start believing their own BS. But you got to get them motivated. If they're not motivated, and they're the hardest of all groups to motivate, and get them in a fixed environment, then they just go right ahead. That's why a lot of physicians who are dynamic supportives work best in hospitals, in medical groups, and don't feel all that comfortable being out on their own. On their own requires more organizational skills, and it only works if they're able to get an adaptive aggressive for an office manager on the upside, adaptive supportives for the basic personnel for billing and secretary and receptionist and personal assistants, and then they feel okay. But otherwise, you won't see them being as healthy as their patients sometimes. Now, dynamic aggressives, they make great mafia bosses. They're the ones that always come in. They never care about their health. You never see these people working out. They don't care what they eat because they develop a false sense of immortality. How could I possibly die or get sick? I'm too rich and famous. And if I do get sick, all I have to do is go to one of the rich people I know, a rich doctor or surgeon or whatever, and they're going to take care of me. After all, I'm the one who built the wing of that hospital. It's my name on it. You think they're going to let me die? Well, there is a karmic lesson. The rich always die fastest. And partly that is because they get the best medicine that you can buy. They don't care about anything except the big issue ahead of them. They don't rest. It's very difficult to be around a dynamic aggressive because their mind is always working. So the people they feel best being around are adaptive aggressives. They keep chronically busy. Or other dynamic aggressives, they can brag. So they love to have their little power lunches with others where it's all about bragging. And then they compete with one another. For instance, of the 100 top most powerful players in Hollywood, it's not about studios any longer. It's about the personalities who own them. Rupert Murdoch, he's the most powerful man in Hollywood. Michael Eisner of Disney, he's the second most powerful. Roth, and you start looking at the different people, it's all people who are dynamic aggressives. They're not actors. They're not financiers. They're not writers. They're not producers. But they make it all happen. Isn't it interesting that the person most important in the whole film industry has no film talent whatsoever? None. All right? None. And whenever they try to guess what film is going to be good and get into scripts or anything else, they always screw it up. Because then it's their ego that's been invested. But they're smart enough to bring the other energies in to really run it for them. But try going up against a dynamic aggressive. You will get rolled over, beaten up, and thrown away. That's why we have such difficulty handling political and white-collar crime. You never see the CEOs of major corporations going to jail. It's always someone else in that chain of command. And we're not stupid. We know that there's something on the other side when they take the fall and come out. Even in politics. Keep your mouth shut and look at all the people in Watergate. The average person became a millionaire after they got out of prison. They all had book deals. They all were very well rewarded. Isn't it amazing? They fell in crime up. They made more money by going to jail than they would have staying out of jail. Crime pays when you're dynamic aggressive. You never see dynamic aggressives betraying each other. It doesn't happen. You never see them on Oprah, ever. Have you? Who do you see on Oprah? Adaptive aggressives. And they're the ones who will betray. So you better be careful about that. On the downside, they're lethal. Dynamic aggressives figure, tomorrow's another day, and whatever I lost, I'm going to make up plus more. And they do. So dynamic aggressives, there are none here to give this advice to. It doesn't matter what you do, you're going to succeed at it. No one else will. And we kind of accept that. Isn't it interesting that we allow dynamic aggressives to get away with so much? Even when they're wrong, we don't change things. Tobacco industry is a good example, right? They told us for all these decades there was no association between tobacco and cancer. We let them get away with it because we had no dynamic aggressives challenging them. The only way you can bring down a dynamic aggressive is a dynamic assertive or dynamic aggressive going after them. It's the only way they're ever going to come down. You cannot bring them down otherwise. They're like an 1,800-pound gorilla on your shoulder. You ain't going to deal with them on your own. It hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. Even when they make mistakes and caused all those deaths from Oriflex and hid the information from the FDA and were found guilty, it didn't become a criminal violation. That would have sent them to jail. It became a civil fine of $25,000. That's good business. If you can kill 20 people and only pay a fine of $25,000, that's about $1,300, $1,400 a person. You made millions and millions of dollars. That's just good business. You should be killing people all day long. History of making bad drugs that hurt people. DES, diethylstilbestrol. They were found guilty by Joyce Bickler in that trial. But has anybody changed? No. Has anybody said the multiply convicted of crimes, civil suit? No. You commit a crime, and watch how many times after your name when something's being reported about you, it's the felon, ex-convict, etc. Dynamic aggressives have a different standard. Dynamic assertives. We've got some dynamic assertives in this room. Yours is a difficult task. Dynamic assertives are unique in several respects. They have as much charisma and determination as a dynamic aggressive, yet they're the ones who are philosophical. They're the philosophers. They're also the activists. They're the ones who seek social justice. But how do you survive when a society is not willing to get behind the person seeking to remedy its wrongs? Because always within the dynamic assertive is the need to correct imbalances. You can own a business, and the likelihood is you'd be very ethical in your business. Probably you'd be exploited by many of your employees because a dynamic assertive as a boss generally bends over backwards to accommodate the people that work for them. Where others set standards, you meet the standards or you're gone. The dynamic assertive is such a softy on that level, they're almost always changing the standards to accommodate the needs of people that work with them. They can be very successful at any job they do. They will be successful. Dynamic assertives never fail for long. So any job they go after will be successful, especially if they become self-employed. They should never work in a company. If you're a dynamic assertive, stay away from working for anybody except yourself. Because the same eye that sees social injustice and political crimes and conspiracies, that very same eye is going to see what's wrong in a company you work with, and you don't compromise. By the way, dynamic assertives rarely compromise. They're idealists. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, these are the kind of people who are dynamic assertives. They're leaders, but they don't want to change the world in their image. They simply want to correct what has happened up to that point, give us a new understanding. They have new paradigms, but they're frustrated because no matter how much they talk about what should change, nothing changes. They have a lot of people know their name, know their face, know what they say, but no one goes ahead and makes any major change. Be honest. Did Martin Luther King change anything? If you're honest, did Martin Luther King actually change anything? Nothing's changed. Brilliant man, giving man, caring man, loving man, spiritual man. He had all the right messages. We didn't do any of it, did we? As a society, not you individually, we didn't become peaceful. We didn't put down our arms. We didn't become more integrated and not just tolerant, but accepting. We didn't break down our racial barriers. We didn't start looking at the highest spiritual aspects of each other and honoring that, did we? Unless I've been asleep someplace and didn't know the changes, and I've got my pulse on the whole world. I read over 100 magazines on worldwide politics every month. I know what's going on in every country in the world, socially, politically, economically. I've seen nothing change. And yet if you had a rally with this person, we'd all feel good. That's what a dynamic assertive does. A dynamic assertive makes you feel good because they make you believe in yourself.